got it. Sorry, had to ditch Sue there. See, I'm just slow. It's a morning.
It's early.
Well, hello, everybody.
Hello. How are you?
Hey. Doing well. Well, I guess I'll kick it off officially. Welcome to Guardians of M365 Governance, episode 22. 22.
It's amazing.
I know. This series is a monthly webcast focused on the rapidly evolving and expanding Microsoft 365 governance story. Our goal is to share insights, best practices, and the latest information about new governance features and capabilities within M365. And we are dedicated to everything governance within the ecosystem. So if you have questions or comments or thoughts about what we should cover or guests we should include, or you'd like to be on the show, all of the above, please comment. And a lot going on for this one, the 22nd episode. We welcome our good friend and fellow MVP, Sue Hanley, who is one of the leading voices on the topic of information architecture. I mean, just try to get her to stop talking about it. I mean, good grief. It's like every party, every social gathering, she's just going on and on and on about it. We're like, Sue, it's a party, relax, but she's talking IA. So anyway, well, welcome, Sue.
Hello. With that introduction, maybe I should turn around.
What, not accurate? Did I not paint an accurate picture, Sue?
I think these days I talk more about my grandchildren than IA. Whatever.
That's a wonderful topic.
Yes, it is.
Well, it's great to have you, though. I don't know if there's anything else. If you want to say a few words about yourself, what you do.
Sure. So I am an information architect. I help organizations design intranets. I care passionately about that space, but also about governance, because you can have a great information architecture and completely destroy it with lousy governance. And I think all of this has become even more important in the era of AI. So I'm really delighted to be here to talk about two of my favorite topics today.
Question for you on that, because I think we all know you as the queen of information architecture and the governance that supports that. What's your origin story there? When was that moment when you were like, oh, no, people, step aside. This is my lane. And you were like, this is what I want to focus on.
I think my origin story comes sort of pre-intranet, because I sort of got into this space, because I ran the knowledge management program for a large consultancy. And I think my background comes from the knowledge management space. And in order to effectively accomplish the goals of knowledge management, to make sure everybody has the right information that they need in the right place at the right time, on the right device, in the right format, to inform what they're doing and not reinvent the wheel and take advantage of everything that one knows, the foundation of making that happen is actually not technology. It's really people and process. But at some point, you have to organize all that content. And so when I was sort of, voluntold to take on this role, which turned out to suit me very well, among other things, I was responsible for managing the library at the organization in which I worked. And so you learn a lot about information management from librarians. I did actually study that in school. I'm a data modeler from way back. And so it's a logical progression to go from data modeling to library, to running a library and learning about, and when you're not a librarian, so managing a bunch of real librarians and understanding what they do and how they organize information, and then translating that into knowledge management just feels like a natural progression. So I come at this from academic and in an academic perspective, but also being sort of landed in this incredible lane that allowed me to kind of leverage all of the things I really care about: people, processes, technology, organizing things, putting all my own personal superpowers together. So that's how I got here.
Love it. That's interesting. One of my favorite champions I worked with at a customer site years ago when I was consulting, her background was she was a librarian. She was an archivist specifically. And that it was amazing how that skill set. She just, the concept of metadata, boom, done.
Yeah, I always said that the people in CAN, the early ones, like a lot of them
A little bit
came
yeah, please, Sue.
from that space.
Mhm.
Well, I think where I remember seeing Sue, I'd see you talk to you. There was like a core group of, I'd say, SharePoint people early on that were always at CAM World and the various those knowledge management focused events. And I'd go and I'd talk on metadata and taxonomy, the various topics there early on, because I kind of came up into the space from that world as well. In fact, I loved those conversations with some of these people that had like PhDs in library sciences that had found their way into the SharePoint world, and just fascinating conversations around it. But I when I was thrust into it was really at the phone company in the mid 90s, and these massive amounts of data, wasn't SharePoint data, but these massive databases, and sorting through all of that, getting that organized, and then getting that retrievable in the way back in the day when you'd put in a query and you would come back after lunch and maybe the query had stopped and given you your result set. Certainly not instant access to data and the scale of the internet. But anyway, to see that those people kind of transition into space, I'm interested when you look back at a lot of those classic information architecture practices. What are the lessons that still hold true? Which, if any, have become obsolete back from that era?
Oh my God, you're asking me to think back. Let me tell you what I think is important, like to remember, as opposed to, I mean, the classic principles of organizing content using simple terms, mutual exclusive values, not asking people to, not having an overly complex taxonomy that human beings can't interact with. That those kind of foundational principles are still 100% true. And as search has improved, the necessity to overtag your content has gone down. And so I am very much in favor of a balancing act between how you organize your content and the quality of the content itself, because search can find content also based on the quality of the content. And if I had to make a trade-off, to be honest with you, I'd focus more on content cleanup than content organization, because I think the value proposition today, and always, but more today, is on accurate, reliable, and current content, not as much as organized content. Not that I don't want it to be totally organized, because I do, but I think I think if you are not focused on governance today and content and only focused on content organization, you're really missing. Well, first of all, you're going to immediately wonder why all your AI initiatives are not working. So.
And think how much more work it is if you don't clean up and you just organize everything, including stuff that is so obsolete, so outdated. You're just putting more effort into that.
Well, yeah, I always tell my clients, if you don't clean your content before I come to look at it, you're paying me to look at crap. So I will take your money, but I really don't like being told, no, we don't do it that way anymore, after you gave me all this content to look at. So that's on you.
Yeah, it's fair.
You know what I'm surprised by? I just assumed that if you do an AI query and you bring back a result set of some content, that it would automatically pull from like the latest, greatest version of that if there's 10 versions of that. It's just not the case. There's a bunch of different factors where it can pull back what might be an outdated version of that document if it finds it.
Well, if you govern your content appropriately and you use versioning in SharePoint, it will only pull back the latest version. But that's not how people do things.
Right.
They, .v1, .v2, .final, .really final, .this time I mean it. And now we've got 10 supposedly high quality versions, because they're all at the top level of everything. And, if you're not securing that content in a way to prevent your AI from looking at it, all the content organization in the world isn't going to solve that problem.
So do you have some super hacks which you always recommend to your customers to clean up content and to find the duplicates, the irrelevant things? Are you recommending tools, or do you ask questions like Marie Kondo in Japan? Does it sparkle joy?
Well, it's funny that you say that.
Joy is asking this question.
Right. I often say, you don't ask. I do say you have to go all Marie Kondo on your content, but you're not asking your content, do you spark joy? You're asking it, hey, are you relevant? Do I need you? And do you deserve to be here?
Mm-hmm.
And so the easy way to get, to clean up your outdated content is look at date and exile based on date. But as I like to remind my children, just because you're old doesn't mean you're not valuable or that you don't know things. And so you can't just universally say, if you were born before X data, you're out of, we don't need you anymore. But we do tend to hoard our information because we might need it someday. And that practice, which is a natural human practice, I think, is going to bite us now, even more than it did prior. And so, are there any super hacks? I'm excited about the potential of the knowledge agent that just came out for SharePoint, because it is going to help us find, I think, when it extends beyond one site at a time, because that's what we really need it to do. It should help us find duplicate data, which I think is one part of the problem. But if just like you find duplicates, the file name may be the same, but they may not actually be duplicates. We still need a human to reason over which one or combination of ones is actually current, because those bad knowledge practices led us, which were, there's excuses for all the bad knowledge practices, but those bad knowledge acquisition practices are what led us to the state that we're in. I had to upload my own copy because I didn't think I'd ever find it again. It's just easier for me to make a copy of it rather than leave it where it was. Things like that. We're going to get bitten by that big time. And we are getting bitten by that big time. So I think, if you haven't thought about this before, you need a practice. You need a way to, I would say, stop the madness going forward. So establish your best practices and then figure out how you can chunk up that legacy content. One easy fix, turn it all off from search.
Yeah. And see who screams. It's the old server scream test. Turn it off, see who screams.
I'm not saying that I would advocate doing that for everything, but somehow you've got to, you have huge data problems. You got to figure out a way to tackle it that's reasonable. And meta tagging it all isn't going to solve the problem, because it's not that's just going to organize junk. So what is the point of organizing junk? What you really want to do is.
That was always the problem. Like a lot of the complaint for doing governance the right way earlier on was that, it was that balance of, hey, look, I need to be productive. I need to get my work done. You're asking me to go jump through these hoops and do all this kind of stuff. And so you've got to find the balance between automation, automatically do certain aspects of that, but then you still need the human who knows the content that they're working with to take a couple steps there, to tag it, to move it in the right place, to, whatever those steps are.
Yeah.
Well,
it almost sounds like your list, like the list of excuses of why they're not doing the right thing. That would be a great article to read. Like, what are the top excuses?
If we followed our own retention policies, we might not even be in this mess. The challenge is people have retention policies for their physical documents and they follow them and do all that stuff. We haven't been as hygienic with our digital content.
What's your what do you find is a successful way to kind of help people get started? I know when I'm talking to a customer that's got like old classic nested architecture, I'm like, start at the bottom, work your way up, or something like that, to try to figure out what needs to be elevated up. That might be a candidate I hadn't thought about. What you said, maybe go into those subsites and turning search off and see if anyone says, hey, I can't find this thing.
Yeah, I have a couple things. I'll go back to Ragnar and quote Hillary Clinton. So I'm going to go Marie Kondo and Hillary Clinton, all content left behind. So when
Okay.
you're migrating and you're moving to a new intranet or taking content from on-prem to SharePoint Online, my rule always is all content left behind. Nobody comes over unless you have earned the right to be there. So that's all content left behind and a little Marie Kondo. Now,
it's like the Apple model, of like, moving over the next version of it. It's like, yeah, there is no upgrade of that. It's like you make the big step over. You move some of the fundamental data, like your contact information. But otherwise, it's a clean system that you move.
So right. So now that we're starting clean, there will be people who want to hoard all that content because sometimes I feel like I have to pry content out of people's cold dead hands. And I've been doing this a really long time, and I am tired of fighting about this. I don't want you to bring it over. I insist on bringing it over. The only people who will be brutal about making cuts are new people who will say, my team didn't create that data. It's legacy content. I don't care about it. I've never looked at it. Great. So if you can find enough people that will say, look, it's not ours. I did read an article years ago that said sometimes it's, unless you are legally required to keep content. So let's take that out of the picture. This is just random stuff that you're keeping. Not like records, like construction records sometimes have to be kept for 99 years past the life of the building. So those I'm not talking about that. And for that, you better be hygienic because you're legally required to do so. Talking about all the other stuff. The article that I read basically said for that other stuff, sometimes it's cheaper to recreate than to try and find it in the pile of wherever it is because no one can find it anyways. So the other thing that I'll often say is, okay, we'll move all that junk, but we're going to put it kind of what I call below the line. So we're going to put it in a library in which we turn search off. So there's no searching of it. So you have to know it in order to get to it. If you know it and you rely on it, then when you find it, you're obligated to move it above the line. And so now you put it in a place where it can be tagged and architected and found and versionized correctly. And so we don't tell people they have to throw everything away. We say, look, you are going to pay for it because it costs to move things to the cloud, but we're not going to make it accessible. We're going to put it there so that if you ever need it and you absolutely have to have it, it'll be there. But otherwise, it's not going to be in an easily retrievable place. It's almost like archiving on the way in.
Right.
Well, that was a strategy for some of the coming from the migration side of things, and having worked for a couple of the vendors. One of the reasons for the reason for moving to a throttled licensing model where you're paying for the volume of content that comes across. The mechanism for the companies was, well, they made more money that way versus, the first company I worked for, Echo, we had a per server, so you can migrate 100 times, you could migrate terabytes, and it costs the same as, moving a gig. So it's all one price. But by throttling it, it forced companies to go and be selective, which was like the old days of data management. So of my knowledge management experience, it was expensive for the storage. You were limited the performance of the queries that you wanted to run. That's why we went and did the whole data mart model, and you did joins to do creative queries on this data. You had to be very thoughtful about that. Not that we want to go back to that world. But this idea of, going back to the migration side, only move what needs to be there. Be thoughtful about that process. And it's, unfortunately, we got into this lift and shift world, and it was a bunch of different things. The products didn't matter because data, the price of storage of this content was, dropping down. And to your point earlier, we don't know how we're going to use this data later. So let's just bring everything across. All of those things contributed to this hot mess.
At some point, it's like sort of pay me now, pay me later. You have to at some point figure out how you're going to do it. Maybe, again, you can do it by date. That might be the easiest way initially to bring content over. We now have options for archive, bring it right into the archive, and then you can go retrieve it if you need it. You can bring it online, but put it below the fold. What I like, something like that. There's just, at some point, you have to figure out what to do with your legacy content and have a plan, a good content governance plan going forward. And honestly, it's the going forward stuff I you have to get that in place so that you're not compounding the mess, clean up the back end. And once we get to that state where we've figured out what to do with the legacy content, we've got good content governance processes going forward, I think the quality of our AI solutions will be better. The outcomes that we achieve will be better. We'll be much happier with where we are in the world with that, all of that.
It'll make AI much happier too, especially for those that are doing like the pay as you go models. It makes that more efficient, more cost effective, better adoption rates, because now it's not returning. Same with search, right? People are like, oh, search sucks. Well, yeah, because you never throw anything away, and it's having to go through all this stuff. So it's the same with AI coming in, and it's got this mountain of data.
What goes around comes around. Search doesn't suck. Your content management process suck. AI, I mean, there's all kinds of issues with AI, but the content it's reasoning over, if it's crappy, it's, crappy in, crappy out. So clean up your content. And I mean, there's other ways. I mean, we need to sort of give the instructions to AI. We can, provide better instructions, but that, relying on someone to do that every time, write a prompt that's crafted in a certain way, or make sure that the model that you're using has very, very strict instructions. That's hard. Getting your data cleaned up actually is easier than all of that and more sustainable.
Isn't that funny though? I mean, I remember having these conversations as, again, when SharePoint was improving the search story, and as a lot of the search, if you're familiar with some of the acquisition history of fast search and things, and as it improved,
Never heard of.
and right, was integrated into the platform. And I would hear this from clients. We joke about it now. It's like, but they would say, it's like, well, search will just find that. Like, I don't need to go take all that preparation steps. I don't need to do any massaging of my data, because search, it's able to find it, right? And I feel like there's that attitude with AI all over again.
Let me add here one dimension. Coming from the fast search acquisition, then I joined Microsoft with fast search. We really cared about metadata, because metadata was so important to create really user relevant filters on the front end. So metadata was important because people are used to filter when going on shopping websites. But now I think in the age of AI and Copilot, we don't care anymore about metadata, because Copilot cannot really use metadata from now. So what is your idea, Sue? Are you still recommending to heavily invest in the metadata because you see a future that Copilot can digest metadata? Or how do you handle this conversation? Because in fast search, it was very relevant.
Yeah, I mean, look, I am required to love metadata because of what I do for a living. So I do. And while Copilot isn't using metadata as effectively as it could today, it will, because it has to. Yeah. And so we need to be able to, the whole concept of RAG is using metadata to sort of pre-query before you do the LLM. So we absolutely need metadata to authoritatively identify a concept with a file, basically. And that the metadata value may not actually be in the file to find. That was why it was so important. That's why it's so important for searching and filtering, is that you may want to have a tag on a file that's not as obvious, or metadata on a file that's not as obvious in the content of the file. So metadata enriches enriches content. I mean, I think of it like, we spend all this time focusing on the grammar of the documents that we write. Well, metadata is part of the grammar, or should be looked at as part of the grammar of the file. And we should think about that. The challenge is that we often try to over metadata things. And so there's this practical side of how much metadata is just the right amount to be able to filter and retrieve our content effectively, and then let search take care of the nuance. So I was working with an organization recently where they had 3,000 items in one metadata term set. And I'm like, first of all,
no,
insane. Nobody can process that. And like, you shouldn't make up a metadata value to classify 5 documents. I mean, that makes no sense because you will find that content in some other way. And so I think one of the challenges we had early on in the KM space is that we were asking people to put 50 tags, 50 metadata values on an individual document. Well, no one's going to spend the time to do that. What we're really looking for is what's the right amount to get the outcome, based on the problems we need to solve with that content. And so I don't think AI means we don't need metadata. I think it just goes back to those fundamental foundational principles. We need the right metadata, because once you're in an environment, like, we're not using AI to solve every problem. Sometimes we want to filter content based on a particular column, based on the customer name or the due date or things like that. So it's not that we don't need it, but what we have historically, in the SharePoint world in particular, we've been telling people you can't use the F word, folders. And we've been telling that you have to put metadata, you have to use metadata instead. And I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and I think it's a, just the right amount of metadata and no more. Now we have AI tools that can enrich our content with metadata. What I want to be sure of, each time you run that model, that it's not changing the metadata. I mean, I get a little bit concerned when I run a model and then Joy runs a model on the same data. We get different metadata that AI generates for the exact same content each time. So not only have we paid for it, but now it's changing. I think at some point we have to figure all this out. So I don't know, that's a long answer to it. Your question.
That's another topic we never talked about, the metadata lifecycle management of AI-infused auto-filled columns using syntax. SharePoint Premium. Yeah. Also
topic. I love that. I think too, with metadata, like, AI is not the only tool we're going to have. Power Automate is still very dependent on metadata for certain, keywords, for triggers, like moving something from here to here, right? There's a lot of stuff that does views based on columns. I love to create views grouped by metadata. There's just so many beautiful things. So many, like you said, to your point, Sue, so many other things still use it. It's going to get there. It's going to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll be able to write prompts eventually that will query based on the content type. I mean, obviously that's what I would like to happen, or based on a column, things like that, to create, bespoke solutions that leverage metadata. So it is being used before, to the search piece, the metadata is being used by the search piece of Copilot before it goes out and uses LLM to generate content. So I think it is using metadata, but I think we could find other ways to use metadata as well. So
create agents that go in and review and do some of the cleanup, or assign that, or something to automate that process. But I mean, it's interesting to go and look at how much things are evolving and changing. I don't know if that changes some of the fundamental conversations you're having around even the structure of an intranet around AI, or is it still the foundational pieces remain the same and they're just adding?
Well, I think in many respects, it's not new. You always should have done things. I think to some extent the atomic elements of your information architecture now are even more important, that you get that right. So Joy, you had mentioned the dreaded S word, subsites. We don't use them in our modern architecture because of governance and all kinds of other things. But when you think about every site being an agent, being able to have agents wrapped around it, and at least currently there's a limit in SharePoint land of 20 containers per SharePoint agent. How you structure that content is going to be extremely important, so that the 20 rule fits and will work for your agent. So just as an example, I have long recommended that for effective management of policies in an organization, you should be storing them centrally. so that you can manage the life cycle of the policies, that you can have an overseer of policies as a whole to make sure they're written consistently. I've been in so many organizations where they say, I can't, every department writes their policy differently. It's really hard for me to understand. Anyways.
Or find.
Right, or find. So all of those things, way better. Now you could distribute policies and use a content type, pull them all together with custom search. The challenge is if they're in more than 20 locations, you can't have an agent that runs on them easily and says, can I bring my snake to work or something like that. So I think how you architect the content is even more important, although it's not. What you do is no different than first focusing on what is the business problem I need to solve with this content? How do I structure my content so that I can also create containers that people can manage? Because at the end of the day, humans are going to look at that content. Oh, that's old. We don't need that anymore. In order to do that, you need to have these elements that are manageable. Like size matters in that case, because you're not going to reason, one human's not going to reason over 2,500 or 25,000 documents. No. But if you give them a container that is the content for which they are responsible, they can, and then you can have the person who knows assisting in content management. So,
oh yeah, and then your knowledge management is so much easier too from that. Like, are we going to have a consistent review date? Well, it's much easier to have a workflow that prompts that if it's all in one place, then
right. So
scattered to the four winds.
Structure matters for content management. I think it matters for AI. So again, AI loves IA, and if you get your IA right, your AI will be better.
Yeah, but here I think we need to orchestrate agents, because currently when we think of agents, and especially about SharePoint agents, we think of generative AI, which is going to create content, is going to autofill columns. But we also need agents who make the decision: is this content currently in the list currently correct? If yes, don't generate new content because it's just fine. So we need this we need more RAG technologies in these systems, because otherwise it would always override. And overwriting costs resources, API calls. It would be expensive, and in the worst case, it would override a good piece of content with something worse. So we need this kind of RAG technology, what we always have with if then else clauses. Conditions, but that's currently not existing in the syntax world, and also not existing in the SharePoint knowledge agent. And that's why I'm thinking it is not enterprise ready. It's a nice attempt. It's a right step into the right direction, but these are baby steps, and currently the knowledge agent is not enterprise ready. I'm assuming, but open for discussions.
Well, I mean, right now we're at V1, I guess I would say, and there are some things I think it does reasonably well, but we don't know what it's going to cost. We don't know whether it's going to do whether each time you run it, it's going to override what it did before. Right. At least on the metadata side, I'm more enthusiastic, honestly, on the content management side, the things that will help with content management. Like finding duplicate content on your site isn't good enough, by the way. It needs to go across sites. But finding content that's old, reminding you, hey, this hasn't been, you haven't hugged this content in a really long time. I mean, I love that. I think looking for broken links, holy cow, that is game-changing in terms of usability on a site. It may not be directly related to all the things we're talking about, but it is going to really help engender trust in our content and our spaces and the sites that we create, and help content owners really manage their content more effectively.
Yeah. Well, I know
that's the reason why.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And that's one of the reasons why I'm mentioning that we need a RAG system here, because it does make sense to always offer the ChatGPT-5 integration of knowledge agent, because sometimes we need a predefined source where I say, listen, it needs to autofill automatically, but based on this single document, or based on this is the knowledge source. This is the trusted reference SharePoint site as a source, because it shouldn't go wild through the internet and search through ChatGPT-5. So I think we need more control about the data sources when we want to auto-populate fields to get better metadata.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, in the interest of time here, I know that we're to kind of wrap things up. I don't know, like any final questions, Joy, Ragnar?
Honestly, I just have one observation. I appreciate that we chose outfit partners today, and we are also sitting on the appropriate sides of the
That's
screen.
right.
So, Ragnar,
I love it. Yeah.
yes.
That's too funny.
Well, people, it's one of those things we don't really talk about that often, but people do watch this series for fashion advice. So just,
I mean,
Check.
right? Right.
So,
The chambray is in, and black is always chic.
Correct.
So we know what we're doing.
from what I hear, is black is the new black. So yeah.
Ooh,
But
very
well,
meta.
Sue, maybe kind of a broader question. Like if you have, because I know you do coaching where people come to you and say, "Hey, I could spend an hour with you and kind of generic questions, ask questions around best practices, those kinds of things." I always like to do the air quotes for best practices, what that means. But if you had to give one piece of advice to organizations that are looking at their intranet information architecture, thinking about AI, and moving forward, that is there any recommendation of like where to start? I mean, you kind of addressed that and said clean up your data. Is that kind of where you land, or what's your advice to an organization saying like where should we focus?
Well, cleanup is always part of the rule, but I would say start with your critical content. So take a step back. What kind of content is critical in our organization? What do we care about the most? And if you're going to organize anything and architect anything, start with your critical content. Think about what drives the organization. So on an internet, 99% of the times, it's policies, because people are going to the internet to learn, how should I be doing things? What's allowed in this organization? So I always believe that if you focus on the business, what's important to the business, then you can sort of spend your calories in that way. So in a consulting firm, it might be increasing the win rate on proposals. Well, great, let's organize our proposals, classify them about whether we won or we lost, capture some information about why we think that happened, and now we've got essentially an archive of both reusable content and AI accessible content that can look at, are there patterns, help us identify what those patterns are so that we can improve our win rate overall. So I would say, always start not with the tech, but with the business problem you're trying to solve. Mm-hmm. And you will end up being more successful with the tech.
Could agree more.
People, process, technology, right?
In that order. Yep.
Love it.
So, well, Sue, really appreciate your time. And I know you're jumping coast these days, back and forth. So it was great to get some of your time here. And of course, we'll see you out on the road. Of course, in the blog post, we'll have all of Sue's contact information if you'd like to reach out and get some of her time. Super easy to get on Sue's calendar. I mean, all we had to do was ask a dozen times and wait 6 months. So super easy.
So easy. She's in demand, Christian.
Yeah.
To be clear.
But thanks so much for your time. And we'll be back next month. So for November, we have on the calendar Mr. Jay Lease now with Microsoft. And then I think we've locked down Norm Young for December. So rounding out the year. So excited to continue with episodes 23 and 24. So we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Sue.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.